The planet's surface flickered with a distant, muted glow. Above it, the sleek, black silhouette of the Vigilance, a battleship that had seen its fair share of skirmishes, glided into orbit. Batman stood on the command deck, his dark eyes scanning the surface below, his mind already calculating the next steps. The mission was simple: broker a peace agreement with the Cerathians, a race of proud and reclusive aliens. It was supposed to be another diplomatic mission, a chance for humanity to expand its influence in the galaxy. But something was off. The air in the room felt charged, the usual calm replaced with an undercurrent of tension. "Everything checks out, sir," Lieutenant Morrow said, her voice steady. "We're receiving the meeting coordinates now." Batman didn't respond immediately. His gaze was fixed on the holographic display of the alien world, a planet teeming with lush forests and winding rivers, seemingly peaceful from above. He couldn't shake the feeling that this calm exterior was hiding something far more dangerous. He had faced enemies far deadlier than alien warriors and knew all too well that appearances often deceived. His instincts were right. The moment Batman stepped off the Vigilance and onto the rocky, mist-covered landing zone, the tension in the air thickened. The Cerathian delegation had been waiting for him, silent, unnervingly still. They were tall, their bodies glowing faintly with an ethereal light, their eyes dark and unreadable. There was no handshake, no greeting, only a nod from their leader, a regal figure dressed in flowing robes of deep purple and black. "We are honored to meet you, human," the Cerathian leader said, his voice smooth, but edged with something Batman couldn't quite place. "We hope your visit will bring peace." Batman kept his posture rigid, his hand near the hilt of his blaster. He wasn't here for honor. He was here to make sure no one turned this fragile peace into an excuse for war. The negotiations were supposed to be civil, but Batman had seen too many attempts to manipulate power through subtle tricks. The moment passed, the air growing heavier with each second, and that's when Batman felt it, a movement too swift to be natural. In the blink of an eye, a figure lunged at him from the shadows. Batman reacted before the assassin could strike, instinctively spinning to the side and drawing his blaster, but it was too late. The attacker, an alien girl, no older than 20, slashed at his throat, her speed impossible for most creatures to match. Her fangs, gleaming with an eerie venomous shine, came within inches of his skin. But the venom never had a chance to work. The girl's eyes widened in shock when her bite did nothing. Batman was different. He was human, yes, but a human who had been forged in the fires of countless battles, and his body had adapted in ways most couldn't understand. The assassin stumbled back, confused and unprepared for her plan to fail. "Who sent you?" Batman growled, his voice low but sharp, his hand tightening around his blaster. The girl's chest heaved, and she straightened, her shock morphing into something like a mix of fear and recognition. You're him, aren't you?" she muttered under her breath. "The human who survives everything." Batman's mind raced, trying to piece together the situation, but his thoughts were interrupted by the sound of more footsteps approaching. The Cerathian leader had finally moved, his eyes narrowing with cold fury. The girl looked up at him, and in a split second, her face twisted with regret and anger. She took a step backward, her gaze flickering between Batman and the Cerathian leader. A moment passed before the Cerathian leader spoke, his voice a calm menace. "It seems we have a problem." The air around them seemed to freeze, the peaceful surroundings now seeming like a lie. Batman knew this wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was the start of something bigger, and as he held the girl's gaze, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the kind of peace mission he was used to. It had only just begun, and it was going to get much worse. The cold, sharp winds of the alien planet whipped through the craggy rocks as Batman stood, motionless, his back to the Cerathian delegation. The girl who had tried to kill him now stood before him, her posture defensive but hesitant. Her strange, venomous fangs glimmered beneath the low light of the alien sky, and she eyed him with a mix of confusion and awe. It was clear that she hadn't expected him to survive the bite. No alien, especially not one of her species, had ever withstood such an attack. "You should be dead," she muttered, her voice soft but edged with disbelief. "No one survives the venom." Batman didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the Cerathian leader, whose expression had shifted from calm to something darker, something far more dangerous. The leader's voice rang out like a thunderclap, breaking the tension. "It seems your reputation does not do you justice, human," the leader said, his tone colder now, each word laced with a hidden venom of its own. "But I see this as an opportunity. Your survival changes things." Batman narrowed his eyes. The Sarathians had always been unpredictable, but now it was clear that this wasn't just a simple diplomatic mission. This was a power play. The girl, the assassin, wasn't just some rogue agent. She had been sent with a purpose, one that was about to become far more complicated than he had ever anticipated. "Who sent you?" Batman's voice was a low growl, his hand never far from his sidearm. The weight of the question hung in the air, thick with the tension of 1,000 unsaid things. The girl hesitated, glancing at the Sarathian leader before lowering her head in what seemed like reluctant surrender. "I was ordered to eliminate you. You've become a problem, a human who can't be killed, who can't be controlled. But I didn't expect this." "Who?" Batman pressed, his patience thinning. "Who's behind this?" The girl looked back at him, her eyes flickering with the barest hint of fear. Then slowly, her voice came in a whisper. "My father, Warlord Vixar." The name hit Batman like a slap. Vixar was known across the galaxy, an infamous warlord, ruthless and unyielding. His ambitions were endless, and he had the power to back them up. Batman had crossed paths with him before, though never face to face. Vixar's desire to dominate was legendary. Now it seemed that Vixar had set his sights on humanity. The realization hit Batman hard. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. This was war. And Vixar wasn't just planning to wipe out humanity. He was preparing to tear the galaxy apart, one planet at a time. Before Batman could process the gravity of the situation, a sudden, blinding flash of light lit up the sky. A massive ship, dark as the void, appeared in the distance, too close for comfort. The girl stiffened, fear creeping into her eyes. "They found us," she whispered. "Vixar's fleet. They've come for you." The ground beneath Batman's boots seemed to vibrate with the weight of the incoming threat. He didn't need to look up to know what was coming. Vixar's ships were a terror across the galaxy, imposing, nearly indestructible, and unrelenting. "Get down," Batman barked, pushing the girl aside as explosions ripped through the air. A ship had just dropped from the sky, and it was raining fire. Batman's instincts kicked into overdrive as the first wave of enemy soldiers descended, armed and ready for battle. They were trained to fight in zero gravity on hostile terrain with nothing but their weapons and their will to survive. Batman knew these soldiers. He had faced worse, and he'd always come out on top. He drew his blaster and fired without hesitation, taking down 2 of the soldiers in one smooth motion. The girl, now aware of the battle's stakes, followed his lead, her movements swift and deadly as she lashed out with precision. She was fast, too fast. Her venomous fangs gleamed again as she took down one of the attackers with a single strike. "Stay close," Batman ordered, his eyes never leaving the battle. "We need to move." But the girl was already ahead of him, darting through the smoke and debris like a shadow, her movements as fluid as water. Batman had to admit, it was impressive. She wasn't just an assassin, she was a force of nature. As more of Vixar's soldiers swarmed the area, Batman felt the pressure mounting. He had to act quickly, or everything would spiral out of control. The Sarathian leader had disappeared, presumably to make his own escape, but Batman had no time for him. He had one mission now: survive and stop Vixar before the galaxy became his battlefield. And so, with no allies but the girl at his side, Batman fought his way through the chaos, determined to end this before it was too late. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the war for the future of humanity had officially begun. The battlefield was chaos. The sky above crackled with the intense energy of detonations, turning the atmosphere into a fiery kaleidoscope of destruction. The ground beneath Batman's boots was slick with debris and burning remnants of the first wave of explosions. He moved with deadly precision, his every step calculated, his mind racing through tactical scenarios, while his body reacted on instinct. There was no time to think. There was only time to fight. The girl was beside him, her movements sharp and graceful, like a shadow in the smoke. She darted between the flames, her fangs bared as she took down soldier after soldier. The venom in her bite was lethal, but it was the speed of her strikes that made her a true weapon. Each soldier she took out fell without a sound, a quick, silent death before their bodies even had a chance to react. Batman couldn't help but notice how she moved, how deadly she was. It wasn't just her venom or speed. It was the way she fought, driven by a deep, unspoken rage. There was something in her, something dark, but also something human, the kind of fury that Batman knew all too well. It was the same rage that burned within him every time he lost someone he cared about. "Stay close," Batman called over the chaos, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The girl nodded sharply, her eyes briefly meeting his, and then she was off again, faster than any human could ever be. He followed, trusting her in a way he hadn't trusted anyone in years. But even with her at his side, the odds were overwhelming. More Cerethian soldiers poured from the burning sky, their armored forms closing in on them like a tidal wave of steel. Batman's blaster barked in short bursts, each shot finding its mark as the enemy fell. His mind raced, calculating angles, predicting movements. Every fiber of his being was alert, but even he knew that they couldn't keep up this pace forever. A sudden, ear-splitting explosion sent a shockwave through the air, sending both Batman and the girl sprawling to the ground. The air thickened with dust and debris, making it harder to see. Through the smoke, Batman heard the girl's growl of frustration as she pushed herself to her feet, her hands already reaching for her blades. "We need to get to cover," Batman shouted, but it was too late. From the horizon, a larger ship descended, its sleek black form cutting through the smoke like a predator closing in on its prey. It was Vixar's flagship, unmistakable with its jagged, battle-scarred hull and the massive cannon that gleamed menacingly under the planet's dim light. The weapon's barrel glowed, a deadly charge building as it locked onto their position. Batman's heart raced. The girl's venomous abilities were impressive, but they were no match for the full might of Vixar's fleet. If they didn't act fast, they'd be reduced to ash. "Move," Batman ordered. He grabbed the girl's arm, pulling her toward a nearby rocky outcrop. His mind was spinning with options, but all he had was the raw, unrelenting drive to survive. He couldn't let this end here, not like this. As they reached cover, the ground shook once again, this time from the blast of the cannon. A shockwave rattled the rocks, nearly sending them tumbling down into the fiery chaos below. The girl slammed into Batman, her body a solid weight against his as they both steadied themselves. "We're not getting out of this without a fight," she said, her voice grim. Her face, usually cold, now showed a flicker of something more. Fear? Uncertainty? Batman couldn't tell, but he could see that she, too, knew how high the stakes had become. "Then we fight," Batman said simply. His voice was calm, but there was steel in it, a resolve that would not bend. "I've faced worse." The girl's lips curled into a faint smile, and for the briefest moment, Batman caught a glimpse of the humanity buried deep within her. It was fleeting, but it was there. A connection, however small, had been made, but there was no time for sentiment. The ship above them fired again, this time with a larger blast. The rocky outcrop began to crumble, and Batman could see the destruction coming faster than they could escape. He turned to the girl. "We need to take out that ship. Now." The girl's eyes flashed with determination. "You have a plan?" "Always," Batman replied, pulling a small, high-powered EMP device from his belt. "Get ready to move." They didn't wait for the next explosion. They moved. With Batman leading the charge, they sprinted toward the cliffside that overlooked the enemy ship. It was risky, but Batman had no other choice. They needed to disable the ship's weapon systems now. As they climbed higher, the wind howled around them, but Batman was focused. The girl was beside him, her eyes locked on the target, calculating her next move. Batman took a deep breath, the tension in his muscles like a coiled spring. The wind howled across the jagged cliffs, swirling the smoke from the battle below into the darkening sky. Batman and the girl crouched behind the rocky outcrop, watching as the massive Cerethian flagship hung above them like an unstoppable predator. The EMP device in Batman's hand was their last hope to disable the ship's weapons. But getting close enough to plant it was no simple task. The ship's turrets were already primed, and more soldiers were flooding the battlefield, closing in on their position. Batman's gaze flicked to the girl. Her features were set, her eyes dark with focus, but there was something else beneath that cool exterior, something he hadn't fully realized until now. The battle had given him glimpses of her strength, her fearlessness, but now, as the tension built around them, he saw it more clearly. She wasn't just an assassin, she was something more, something lost. "Stay low," Batman murmured. "We need to move fast." The girl nodded without a word. Her movements flew as she darted from cover to cover, staying in the shadows like a phantom. Batman followed closely, keeping his head down. His mind raced as they advanced, calculating every angle, every step. He knew the stakes had never been higher. As they neared the edge of a cliff that overlooked the Sarathian ship, Batman paused, scanning the scene below. The flagship was massive, a hulking behemoth that seemed to eclipse the horizon. The ship's dark surface was pocked with battle scars, but its engines were firing at full strength, sending plumes of orange and red into the sky. A small contingent of Sarathian soldiers patrolled the perimeter, unaware of their approach. "Now's our chance," Batman whispered, pulling a small grappling hook from his utility belt. He fired it with precision, the hook sinking into a rock ledge just above the ship. The girl was already moving, scaling the rock face with ease, her fingers finding footholds like a predator stalking his prey. Batman followed close behind, his every movement calculated and controlled. The girl was fast, too fast, almost, but Batman kept up, his eyes never leaving her as she leaped effortlessly from rock to rock. She was more than just a soldier. There was something instinctive in the way she moved, something deeply ingrained in her DNA. She was a force of nature, and it wasn't just her alien venom that made her dangerous. It was the way she fought, the way she survived. As they reached the top, the two of them crouched behind a rock outcrop, overlooking the massive engines of the Sarathian ship. Batman's fingers tightened around the EMP device. The plan was simple: slip in, plant the device, and get out before the ship's weapons could be activated. But simple plans rarely stayed simple, especially in a battle this intense. The girl turned to him, her eyes locked on his. There was a brief moment of silence between them, a moment where the weight of everything hung in the air. She was a warrior, yes, but there was something more to her than that. Batman could see it now. Her resolve, her fury, her pain. It was all wrapped up in the decision she'd made to stand with him, to fight against her father. "Are you ready?" Batman asked, his voice low. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she moved forward, her body blending with the shadows, her footsteps silent as she crept toward the ship's engine bay. Batman followed, keeping pace, his every muscle primed for action. As they neared the heart of the ship, they encountered the first line of defense. A squad of Sarathian soldiers, their armored bodies glinting in the dim light. The girl didn't hesitate. She was already on the move, her fangs flashing as she took down the first soldier with a single swift strike. Batman followed suit, his blaster roaring as he eliminated the rest. They reached the core of the ship, where the EMP device would have the most impact. Batman slid the device into place, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. But just as the device was locked in, the ground beneath them trembled. Something was wrong. Before Batman could react, a sharp voice echoed through the comms. "Do you really think you can stop me, human?" The voice was cold, smooth, too familiar. Batman's heart sank as the voice continued. "I've been watching you. Both of you. You've been playing into my hands this entire time." The girl froze, her face paling slightly. Her father's voice. Batman's eyes met hers, and in that instant, everything clicked. This wasn't just a war between species. This wasn't just about survival. It was personal. Her father, Vixar, had been using her all along. "You don't have to do this," Batman said softly, his voice low but unwavering. "You don't have to fight for him." The girl's jaw clenched. "I don't have a choice. I never did." Before Batman could say anything more, the ship's alarms blared to life. The EMP device was activated, but it had triggered something else, something far worse. The ship's hull trembled beneath Batman's boots as he and the girl sprinted down the narrow corridor, the sound of blaring alarms echoing around them. The EMP device had done its job, but not as perfectly as Batman had hoped. The Sarathian flagship's shields were weakening, but they weren't down yet. The ship was now in chaos, its systems malfunctioning, but the heart of it, Vixar's central command, was still intact. And that's where the danger now lay. "We're running out of time," Batman said, his voice a low growl. His every step was precise, his instincts sharp as ever. Behind him, the girl's footsteps matched his pace, her eyes scanning the hallway for any signs of danger. The girl's presence, once merely an ally, now felt like a strange kind of tether. Batman could feel her determination, her drive to break free from her past, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze. It wasn't just Vixar's betrayal she was trying to escape. It was everything she'd been taught, everything she'd known. And now, standing at the edge of this war, she was facing a choice she had to make on her own. They rounded a corner, only to be met by a squad of Sarathian soldiers, their glowing weapons raised. Without hesitation, Batman ducked into a roll, his blaster already in his hand. He took down the first two with sharp, calculated shots, his focus unbroken. The girl followed suit, her movements a blur of speed and precision. She was a whirlwind, dispatching the remaining soldiers in seconds, each strike more lethal than the last. Batman didn't pause. He knew there was no time to linger. They had to reach the command center before Vixar activated the ship's self-destruct protocol. As they moved deeper into the bowels of the ship, the air grew thicker, the oppressive weight of imminent destruction bearing down on them. "How much further?" the girl asked, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a quiet desperation that Batman had heard before in other allies who were on the brink of losing everything. "Not far," Batman replied, his mind working in overdrive. The path ahead was clear for now, but the closer they got to Vixar's command center, the more dangerous it would become. He could already hear the sound of reinforcements moving through the ship, their heavy footsteps pounding against the metal floors. They arrived at a junction, the last corner before the entrance to the command center. Batman pressed his back to the wall, his eyes scanning for traps, his senses heightened to every movement. He could hear Vixar's voice through the ship's intercom system, calm and chilling, like a snake coiling for the strike. "I know you're there, Batman." Vixar's voice boomed, its coldness seeping through the speakers. "You can't win. You're just one man. You have no idea what you're up against." Batman's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had no time to argue with the warlord. He had only one goal, to stop Vixar before the ship was torn apart. The girl stepped forward, her posture tense. "It's him," she said, almost to herself. "My father." Batman glanced at her, his face hard, unreadable. He could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't need to say it, but Batman knew. Vixar had used her. He had molded her into a weapon, but now she was standing against him. She was fighting to reclaim her life, to rewrite her own story. Batman nodded. "Focus. We're almost there." The girl's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned toward the entrance. Her breath steadied, her eyes narrowing with purpose. She was ready. Whatever doubts she had left were gone. They pushed forward, moving swiftly through the final stretch of the corridor, each step leading them closer to the heart of the ship. As they reached the large, reinforced doors that led into Vixar's command center, Batman glanced over at the girl. This wasn't just about defeating Vixar anymore. This was about dismantling everything he had built. The Sarathian warlord had used the galaxy's divisions to fuel his own rise to power, and now he had to fall. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing the massive command room beyond. The walls were lined with monitors and holographic displays, all showing the chaos unfolding across the ship. In the center of the room stood Vixar, tall, imposing, and confident. His sharp features were twisted into a smirk as he looked down at them. "Did you really think you could stop me?" Vixar sneered, his voice like gravel. "You're just two insignificant ants, scrambling to put out a fire that's already set the galaxy ablaze." Vixar's laugh rang out, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the room. But as Batman watched the girl's fury unfold before him, he saw something else in her eyes. A fire, a resolve that had burned into existence from the ashes of her past. For the first time, she was fighting for herself. And that made all the difference. The battle had begun. The sound of metal crashing against metal filled the room as the girl and Vixar clashed once again. Her movements were swift, almost instinctual, as she danced around him, her fangs bared and blades flashing in the dim light of the command center. Vixar, though older and more experienced, was no match for her speed, but his power was still formidable. He was relentless, like a beast trying to crush his prey beneath a crushing weight. Batman didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, his mind calculating every possible move. He knew the girl was strong, but she wasn't invincible. Vixar had more resources, more experience. This wasn't just a fight for control, it was a fight for survival. If they didn't act quickly, everything they'd fought for would be reduced to nothing. "Keep moving," Batman muttered under his breath as he dove into the fray, his blaster raised. He fired a quick shot, but Vixar deflected it effortlessly, the blast ricocheting off his armor. The girl's voice rang out, fierce and raw. "I will make you pay, Father, for everything you've done." Vixar's eyes flashed with something cold, something darker. "You're nothing but a tool, girl. You always have been. You think you can escape me? You think you can rewrite your fate?" The words cut through the air like a knife, but the girl didn't flinch. Instead, she pushed forward, driving her blades into Vixar's armor. The impact sent sparks flying, but it wasn't enough to pierce through. Batman watched closely, his mind working at lightning speed. Vixar was strong, but the girl's venom, her speed, was their only real advantage. If they could get close enough, if they could catch Vixar off guard, they might stand a chance. Batman's plan was forming as he darted across the room, positioning himself for a clean shot. But just as he was about to take the shot, the lights above flickered, casting everything into darkness. A sudden shift in the air, the low hum of energy building in the room. It was too late. Vixar had activated the ship's self-destruct sequence. "Enough," Vixar bellowed. The ground beneath them trembled, and the ship's metallic walls groaned with the tension of imminent destruction. The countdown had already begun. Batman's heart raced. The time they had was limited. Vixar had planned for this. His escape wasn't just a priority, it was his final act of control over everything. Batman's eyes darted to the girl, who was locked in a vicious struggle with her father, her every move desperate, fueled by rage. But even that wasn't enough. Vixar's power was overwhelming, and they were running out of options. "Listen to me," Batman called out, his voice rising over the chaos. "We have to get out now. You want your freedom? We need to finish this." The girl's eyes flickered with uncertainty for just a moment, but then she nodded, understanding. She broke away from Vixar with a fluid, almost graceful motion, springing back with a fierce growl. Vixar, momentarily stunned, turned to face her, but not before Batman made his move. He surged forward, his hands swift and precise as he activated the pulse disruptor in his belt. A flash of blue light erupted from his gauntlet, and Vixar's shield systems cracked, the energy field flickering for just a second. It was enough. Batman dove forward, tackling Vixar to the ground, his strength catching the warlord off guard. The two of them slammed into the ground, and Batman's blaster found its mark, shooting the central core of Vixar's chest plate. Vixar roared in pain, his body twitching as the energy surges tore through his armor. His eyes, full of hatred, locked onto Batman. "You think this ends here, human? You think you've won?" Batman's grip tightened around his opponent, his resolve solidifying. "It ends now," he said, his voice steady but unyielding. "You'll never hurt anyone again." But even as Vixar's body went limp beneath him, Batman knew it wasn't over. The countdown still ticked away, and the ship was on the brink of collapse. He turned to the girl, who was already up, her body poised like a striking viper. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the control panels. The countdown echoed through the ship like the ticking of a clock in a dead man's tomb. Each second felt like an eternity as Batman and the girl rushed through the dimly lit corridors, the last remnants of the Cerathian forces closing in from all sides. The destruction of Vixar's flagship was imminent, and every hallway they crossed seemed to bend and twist into chaos. Batman's mind raced, every movement calculated, every step deliberate. The girl was at his side, her eyes fierce, her breath steady despite the urgency. Together, They made their way toward the escape pods, where their only hope of survival lay. But the path to the pods wasn't clear. Sarathian soldiers, armed and ready, lined the hallway ahead. Batman raised his blaster, taking a quick shot at the nearest soldier. The blast hit with precision, sending the soldier crashing to the floor. The girl was already moving, her body a blur of speed as she disarmed another soldier, her blades flashing in the low light. Her fangs bared. She drove a swift strike into the soldier's chest, her face emotionless as the man crumpled to the ground. But more soldiers were coming. The sound of their boots thudded against the metal floors, getting louder, closer. "We don't have time for this," Batman muttered, his eyes scanning the hallway for an exit. There was no time to waste, no room for hesitation. The ship was collapsing around them, and they had one chance to escape. "We'll make time," the girl replied, her voice steady but hard. Her eyes never left the approaching enemy, but there was something more in her gaze now, something that wasn't just survival. It was resolve. She wasn't just fighting to live. She was fighting to end this, to break free from her past. The next wave of soldiers burst around the corner, weapons raised, but Batman was faster. His blaster roared to life, hitting the nearest soldier square in the chest. The girl was right behind him, her blades cutting through the air with deadly precision. The soldiers fell in a blur of violence and speed, their attempts to retaliate only making them more vulnerable. But just as they made it to the junction leading to the escape pods, something exploded from above, sending debris raining down. The ship shuddered, and the air thickened with the sound of creaking metal as the walls groaned under the pressure of the destruction. The exit was blocked. They were trapped. "We got to move, Nelbo," Batman shouted over the roar of the collapsing ship. The girl didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the bulkhead, her hand slamming into the emergency override switch. Sparks flew as the door slid open, revealing a narrow passage leading to the escape pods. But the Sarathian soldiers weren't far behind. Batman could hear them closing in, their heavy footsteps echoing in the chaos. Time was running out. "Go," Batman shouted, motioning for the girl to lead the way. She didn't need to be told twice. She sprinted through the door, with Batman right behind her, his blaster raised as a final line of defense. The girl moved like a shadow, swift and unrelenting, her fangs flashing as she tore through the last line of enemies blocking their path. They reached the escape pods, but the room was already filled with enemies. Sarathian soldiers, armed and ready, surrounded the pods, their weapons raised in a threatening circle. The girl and Batman stood at the entrance, trapped in the center, with no way out. "We're not leaving without those pods," Batman growled. His eyes were cold, his muscles taut with readiness. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. The girl looked at him, her expression hardening, and for a brief moment, Batman saw something else in her eyes. It wasn't just rage, it was hope. Hope that they could win. Hope that they could escape. They weren't alone anymore. They had each other. With a sharp movement, the girl dove into the fray, her blades flashing in the dim light. She was a whirlwind of violence, cutting through enemies. The escape pod shuddered violently as it detached from the crumbling Sarathian flagship. The violent eruption of energy behind them cast the stars in stark flashes of brilliant light, the ship's final death throes rippling through the cosmos. Batman and the girl sat in the dim light of the escape pod, breathless, but their bodies stiff with tension, as though the danger wasn't truly over. The hum of the pod's engines was the only sound that filled the space, steady and rhythmic as it broke away from the chaos of the flagship. Through the small viewport, Batman could see the distant glow of the Sarathian ship disappearing into the vastness of space, lost, a firecracker gone out in the night. Beside him, the girl was quiet. Her expression was unreadable as she stared into the void, her mind clearly still wrestling with the events that had unfolded, the path that had led them here. She was alive, yes, but she had just made the choice to leave behind everything she'd ever known. She had cut her ties with her past. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice surprisingly small, the weight of the question almost too much to bear. Batman turned to her, his face hard as ever, but there was a softness in his eyes, something understanding. Something that only those who had known loss, who had walked through the flames, could truly understand. "For now," he said, his voice steady. "But that ship, Vixar's legacy. It won't be the last of us. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant, lost in thought. I don't know what to feel, she confessed, her voice almost a whisper. I've spent my entire life under his control, fighting his battles. And now, I'm free. But what do I do with that freedom? Batman's gaze softened, and for the first time in this entire war, he allowed himself to speak candidly, not just as a warrior, but as a man who had seen the cost of true freedom. Freedom isn't just something you get. It's something you build, one choice at a time. The girl's lips pressed together, and she met his eyes for a moment, as if testing the weight of his words. Slowly, she nodded. I've been fighting so long, fighting for survival. But now, I have to figure out what it means to live. Batman's expression hardened again, his focus shifting to the controls. Living means deciding who you are. It's not about the past. It's about what you do next. They were silent for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the pod and the occasional beat from the control panel. But as the seconds passed, the tension between them began to settle. The girl shifted in her seat, her eyes flitting to the small display in front of them. She pulled up the star chart, tracing the lines of light as they navigated through the deep reaches of space. I don't know where to go, she admitted, her voice still tinged with uncertainty. I'm not sure I can go back to my home. I don't even know if I deserve it. Batman studied her for a moment. Deserving doesn't matter. It's about what you can live with. You've been living someone else's life for too long. Now it's your turn to write your own story. The girl's fingers hovered over the navigation controls, and after a moment she typed in a destination. An uncharted region of space, far from the grasp of the Sarathians, far from everything she had known. A place where she could rebuild. A place where she could finally be free. It's a risk, Batman said, watching her. All freedom is a risk, she replied, her voice steady now, resolute. But it's a risk I'm willing to take. Batman nodded, a faint glimmer of approval in his eyes. Then let's see it through. The pod began its journey toward the unknown, the stars outside turning into a blur of light as the ship's thrusters powered forward. It wasn't just a new chapter. It was a new story altogether, one that had yet to be written. But as they sailed through the vast, uncharted reaches of space, Batman knew one thing for certain. The girl was no longer a weapon of war. She was something far greater. She was the embodiment of the power of choice, the ability to shape a future no one could dictate. And as the darkness of space enveloped them, Batman allowed himself a rare moment of peace. For the first time in the silence of the pod, he felt the weight of victory, not just over the Sarathians, but over the long shadows that had always followed him. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally free. The stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter as they sped toward their new lives. For the first time, the dawn felt within reach,